Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about, I'm going to start up a discussion here where I'm talking about the difference between full frame and crop sensor cameras, and also how I don't really think it's that much of a gotta get a full frame because it's a full frame debate. Okay, the background here is I have got about 4 cameras. 2 are DX or crop framed sensors, and 2 are full frame. So I've got the Nikon D700, which is a 12 megapixel full frame camera, the Canon 5D Mark II, which is a 21 megapixel full frame camera. I use the D700 for weddings and the Canon for property videos. I also have 2 other cameras. One is the Fuji S5 Pro, which I also use for weddings, usually outside, which is effectively a 6 megapixel crop framed sensor. And I also have the Canon 550D, which I use for kind of my sports video stuff, so I can get the cool slow motion stuff. So I've got a hand in both camps here. And the reasons, first of all, the reasons why I got the full frame cameras is because of their low light capabilities. They're high ISO ability and they're low noise. So for the weddings with the D700 shooting inside a church, I can happily have it ISO 3200 and not be worried in any way about, oh my god, there's going to be noise or grain or colour noise or anything like that. And what noise I do get, even at 6400, is easily sorted out in Adobe Lightroom. For the Canon, the full frame one, I used to use the 550D for inside the properties with the Tokina 11 to 16mm lens, a nice wide angle lens at f2.8. However, in a lot of properties in Scotland, and in Scotland when there's not a huge amount of sun, and with only, what we're only allowed about like 40 watt light bulbs nowadays, the inside of properties is getting darker and darker and darker. So I was needing to start bumping up the ISO up past 1600, and on the Canon 5D Mark II, on the Canon 550D, it was really starting to show up in the video files. So got the 550D, and even at ISO 2000, it's just lovely for video. So those 2 cameras, I got them not for their megapixels, not even for their build quality, but for their ability to shoot in low light situations. Now the other 2 cameras, the 550D and the Fuji S5 Pro, Fuji S5 Pro I bought because of its huge dynamic range. Now if I'm doing any external shots of properties, I'll use the S5 Pro because that gets me loads of detail in the sky and in the shadows. If I'm shooting sports and outside stuff, I want the fast 60 frames a second I can get with the Canon 550D because the full frame 5D Mark II doesn't give you 60 frames a second at 720p. In fact, it doesn't even give you 720p. So the drawbacks of the Canon 5D Mark II are that you don't get sporty stuff. And with both of those cameras, I've never really had a problem with the focusing or anything like that. But I hear so many times people going, oh, I've got to get a full frame. Oh, full frame's amazing. Oh, it's so good. Okay, so what are the actual, why? What's the big deal? Well, for me, at that time, it was all because of the high ISO abilities. I've got a friend who does a little bit of video, and she's got the 550D, and she's like, oh, I really need to get the 5D Mark II. And I'm like, you've only got the kit lenses with the 550D, first of all. You're going to have to buy all new lenses if you're going up to the full frame camera. She's like, oh, didn't know that. And I said, why do you want to do it? Why do you want to get the full frame? She's like, oh, because your videos are so much better than mine. And I'm like, is that just because I'm using a different camera? And then she showed me the videos which were technically better, and I was saying that was actually done with the 550D. Sorry. So again, what I would say, if you're doing video, full frame doesn't necessarily make a better video or film, especially if you're just doing kind of stuff. If you're shooting Hollywood films, yeah, go for full frame for that shallow depth of field and all that kind of stuff. But however, if you're just shooting stuff, then the full frame, you're not really going to see that huge a benefit or that improvement in yourself without actually getting better lenses or actually just getting better at taking videos or even learning the settings of your camera. That's the worst thing I see, is people upgrading their camera before they've even figured out what ISO is or how to change their their exposure compensation before they've even, not figuring out how to work their camera inside and out, going, photos just aren't as good as yours, I'm going to get a better camera. Oh, you fool, you're just spending money on something which isn't going to make your photos any better. So a lot of people go on about full frame being better because you get a shallower depth of field. I've done a couple of videos about that, saying actually with full frame you don't, the depth of field is really about your lens. However, with your lenses you can be further away and all that kind of crap, so you can discuss that as much as you want. But there are downsides of going to full frame. First of all, you need to get full frame lenses, so that's going to be more expensive. Secondly, the larger sensor, well, actually it differs between each company and each camera about where the actual sensors for the focusing are. For example, some people were complaining with that the Nikon D3S is that all the focus points are pretty much in the centre, and then some cameras it's a little bit further out and all that kind of stuff. So that's a different thing to really look at per camera. It seemed like they took the D300 sensor array and put that straight into the D3, which was a much bigger sensor, and it's just a smaller central area that was actually being the focus point. So that was a bit pump. Also, with the fact that the lenses are more expensive, your lenses have to be a longer focal length. For example, on a crop framed camera, you can have a 10mm a Sigma 10 to 20mm lens. Now that is ultra wide angle. That's pretty much seen from there to there, which is cool. So you get very wide angle, and you get a super deep depth of field because you're so wide angle. Your depth of field is effectively from what, like 10 centimeters in front of your lens to everywhere in front of it is all in focus. So that's good. Again, if you're doing property photography and you need the brightest image possible, so you put your aperture to its maximum, f2.8 if possible, and then at f2.8, everything which is beyond hand distance away is all in focus, and then it's like, cool, I don't need to do focus stacking or anything like that, or bring in loads more light so I can stop down the aperture. So that's always handy. So with full frame cameras, what you need, well, the widest you can get is a 14mm. Okay, that's still uber duper wide. It is, once you convert it, it is as wide as you can get. However, some people may start to notice, if you pixel peep a little bit, is that you do start to develop depth of field. Even when you get to, well, whenever you get to 16mm, which is what I have on the Canon 5D Mark II, 16mm, there is a depth of field. So I have to really double check that am I focusing on the table, or am I focusing on the vase behind the table, or am I focusing on the window? Because there is a depth of field difference at 16mm at f2.8. So that's something to be aware of, that if you want everything to be in focus, going for a full frame camera, you get less in focus because you have a shallower depth of field if you are using a longer focal length lens. Gotta keep that bit of detail in there. The next thing is, because the sensor is so much bigger and takes up so much more area, and the lenses need to be more expensive because they need to cover a bigger thing. They're usually bigger, so even getting filters for your lenses, that's going to be more expensive. However, the big thing here is that you get a heck load more vignetting. Now, what they say about the crop sensor cameras is that the sensor, because it's smaller, it's in the middle, that whenever you put a lens on top, it's crappier bits of the image are well beyond the edges of a crop frame sensor. If you're using a full frame sensor, you will notice a lot more at the corners vignetting. And also, if you go for a wider angle lens, what happens is that it's so much more difficult for it to bend the light all the way from like way over there all the way down into the sensor, that the edges on a full frame camera with an ultra wide angle lens are usually very, very difficult to have sharp and not highly vignetted. And vignetted meaning like the dark areas around the sides. So again, you're going to have to start editing your photos a heck of a lot more than what you would have if you're doing it with the crop frame camera. Cropped frame sensor camera thing. And then the other point that people could say, oh, but you get more megapixels with your full frame cameras. It's like, well, yeah, no, not anymore. With Nikon, they've got their D something, which has got 36 million pixels, which is probably great for in the studio when you're doing studio stuff. However, it's going to take ages to edit those photos and all that kind of stuff, so it'd be an absolute nightmare. However, go back to 2008, the Nikon D3X came out, and that was a 24 megapixel full frame camera, and everyone's like, oh my god, that is amazing, it's got like 24 megapixels, I'm gonna have to get it from a studio. So everyone that had a studio were like, I need this 24 megapixel camera. If they weren't already shooting with like Hasselblad with 40 megapixels or Leaf or Mamiya or all that kind of stuff, you know, medium format cameras, then they were going for the full frame, and they were going for like something with a high megapixel, which is a bit like the Canon 5D Mark II, but they went for, or the, what was the Canon DX, 1DX, or is it the 1DS? Oh, I can't remember. They had a kind of a high megapixel one as well, but it was the same number of megapixels as the Canon 5D Mark II. So, again, so anyway, Nikon brought out this full frame, 24 megapixels, and I was like, oh, look at the megapixels, that's so much detail. However, nowadays, if you're needing a load of detail, Nikon have now got a couple of crop frame cameras which are 24 megapixel images, sensors as well. And I'm just looking here on DxOMark here as well, and we're looking at the indicative price, and the difference between a D3X and a D5200 is 10 times the price. If we look at that, was 897 and 9172. So there's almost 10 times the price difference, however you get the same number of megapixels. So a newer camera, the crop frame D5200, god there's so many numbers here, versus the D3X, because the D3X gets a higher score, that's good. It's got a fractional bit more bit perception, or colour depth. Dynamic range is not as good as the newer sensor. However, its ISO is a little bit better. Okay, so that's disappointing considering it's 10 times the price. Let's look at its. Okay, so there is about a half stops difference worth of, what's this? This is the noise difference. It's saying here, but that looks pretty close. Does that look like 10 times the price equivalent? I don't know. Dynamic range. Well, it looks like the newer crop frame camera is actually a little bit more dynamic range and stays a little bit higher all the way throughout. Interesting. Let's see if it's different on the screen. Yeah, pretty much the same. Interesting. Tonal range. Okay, the D3X. So okay, so maybe if you're doing portraits in a studio, then yeah, the tonal range here is a little bit better with the full frame camera, and then the color sensitivity again. The D3X certainly still beats it, but we are looking at hairs widths differences here. So, you know, I was in a shop the other day, and it was a Nikon D3X second hand in the shop, and it was saying it was £2,850. I was like, oh right, okay, it's under £3,000, and it was like £250 then plus VAT. I'm like, oh, so it's back up to like 3,500 or something. I was like, actually, that's not really that much of a discount compared to buying it new at the time. And also, wait a minute, if I was wanting a super high megapixel camera, why would I bother going for that? Okay, so what you are getting with the D3X compared to the D5200, you're getting a much better build quality. You're getting this full frame, which effectively is a little bit better with the higher ISO. However, you're not using a high ISO with a ultra megapixel camera, so that's not really that important. Getting the shallower depth of field potentially, and you're having to use better lenses because you can't use your crop frame cameras, crop frame lenses. So in the end, I'm just wanting to see what you all think. I think for me, the debate about full framing, going full framing, everyone loving the full frame, is almost a bit of a marketing gimmick. The fact that the technology is increasing and getting better and better and better, that the argument for getting a full frame camera because it's got better megapixels or more megapixels isn't really relevant these days. The argument for getting a full frame camera because it's better ISO, well, that probably is only one generation's better than the current crop frame cameras. And another thing that you might look for is dynamic range. Now that's the one thing which we've all been wanting the camera companies or the sensor companies to really beef up is it's the dynamic range of the sensors, because everyone's like, oh, film has got so much more dynamic range than technology. So that's one thing that people who are in the know want better dynamic range in their sensors. And I'm just looking here. So we're seeing the most up-to-date cameras, the D800, the D600. However, then the D7000, okay, so that's a crop frame camera, and then the D5200. Okay, so dynamic range, and then it's a D3X, so it beats that. So and then it's 5100. So there seems to be, dynamic range certainly doesn't seem to be dependent on full frame or not. So that's a little bit interesting up there. And that's, well, it certainly looks like the Nikons kick the Canon's ass, because I'm going all the way down to 13. Still no Canons yet. Oh, was that one? Canon 6D is down at 55th place compared to 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, compared to a lot of Nikons. Anyway, doesn't really matter. So I'm just kind of saying here that the event of full framing that enthusiasts, or well, not so much enthusiasts, but noobs are like, oh, I need to get full frame. Oh, full frame's so good. You're just like, do you really know what your camera can do already that makes you think that full frame will enhance your photos? Do you even have the lenses which will work on a full frame camera? And do you understand the drawbacks of going full frame as well? So that's just my little thought for today. Interested to hear your thoughts as well, and hopefully start a little bit of discussion, and maybe there'll be future videos on this as well. So speak to you all later. Cheers, bye bye.